All right. Welcome, James Waltham, to the Flip Side podcast. Or I should say, AKA the honest guy, the honest bloke. Sorry, I keep want to say honest guy.
Don't worry, man. It could be, well, yeah, it's the honest bloke, but I've had
The honest fella, the honest boy.
the honest chap. So yeah, man, like that's all good.
So, like, where did it come about? Like, how did it come about? What was the sort of motivation behind? Obviously, you kind of got the blog, and you sort of started with the social media pages on it. What was the motivation behind actually starting it?
I would say my own experience with two things really. My own experience with challenges within mental health. So I'd say over the last kind of 5 years or so, I've had a few challenges personally, and that's led me on quite like an amazing journey of kind of self-discovery and understanding various aspects of mental health through, as I say, through my own experience. But also, I think I started to recognize kind of the issue, not just within myself, but within kind of society and within men, and the challenges that men have around kind of opening up and connecting with their emotions, understanding their own mental health. It was about 2 years ago, I lost a friend, one of my closest friends, to suicide. And I would say, as someone who was always quite vocal, I had been, an advocate for speaking out and, around issues of mental health for a few years before that. It was a huge shock to lose someone who none of us knew was struggling in that capacity. So that sort of led me on to, I think, broadening my interest around mental health to kind of, the wider society, and then, tapping into the kind of issue that men struggle with. So yeah, man, that's kind of where it came from.
Nice. And so you were able to sort of tap into the whole subject of mental health even before you lost your friend. Was that just like through your own experience and you just wanted to kind of find out more kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I've personally always been someone who is just through personality or how my brain works. I've always been someone who's quite deeply analytical and has a desire to understand things.
Yeah.
So when I started experiencing challenges with my mental health, it took me, actually, I'd say, from my first kind of, like, not episode, but kind of just period of, let's say, depression. I went through a kind of quite a long period of chronic depression for about 2 years. And for that 2 years, I was kind of trying to understand it. I didn't believe that I'd suddenly just, had this bizarre chemical imbalance in my brain occur out of nowhere. For me, I knew that there was a trigger, a stimulus, something that had caused it. And yeah, subsequently there was for me, as soon as you understand that, you can then start to unpack it, and it gives you, whether it be a closure or an understanding, and suddenly you can then learn, once you know what you're dealing with, you can then learn to work on it. So I would say that was where it all started, and then it's just kind of transitioned and progressed from there over the last few years.
Because I think that's almost one of the hardest steps, isn't it? Just like actually even acknowledging that you've got something going on, like whatever, like however bad or like, okay, like, however bad it might seem, or just actually realizing, like, okay, right, I have, even if you don't have to label it, but it's just knowing that you've got something going on that you think, all right, okay, that's not right. And
for sure. I'm a big believer that everyone has periods of good and bad mental health. I think the label can often be the thing that either gives an individual, it can be a very positive thing for an individual because it can give them something that they can say, it's this. The negative, obviously, stigma generally comes in when it's other people's perception of it who don't understand it. But I think that everyone has good and bad periods in their life of mental health. Just some people might go through a period of deep grief after losing a loved one, but they might just feel sad for a really long time and never have a desire to understand what that is or unpack it or fix it. They just sort of, they're just not that way inclined, so they just maybe tolerate it for a number of years until it works its way out naturally.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, because it's, you need to compare it to, say, physical health, where it's like you could have a cold, you could have a broken leg, or you could have cancer, or there's like the whole scale of kind of how severe something might be, like in terms of your physical health. And like mental health is exactly the same. And I think there's like a portrayal of just sort of like, there's like, everyone wants the whole kind of just like black and white, like you know, like you're fine, or you're just crazy. You know, like there's like people don't realize that there's just so much in between.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's, I mean, generally the stigma around mental health comes from fear. It's a fear of not understanding it. And I think that's probably one of the things where labels do potentially become quite important, because if something is given a label, it gives it meaning, it gives it context. Whereas if someone is just, say, for example, experiencing, it could be something that, like, whether it be bipolar or like, manic depression or something where the symptoms are going to be quite severe, you know, to people who don't understand that, and if there isn't a label there, that person's just fucking nuts. You know, he's just a bit off his head, and mate, you want to steer clear of him, he's fucking got a screw loose.
Yeah, exactly.
So sorry, I'm all right to swear, aren't
I? Oh yeah, go for it.
Good, sorry. I was
too late now. Fucking hell.
Yeah, okay, good, that's fine. Yeah, so that's, I think there's that lack of, when something is invisible, you know, when it is something that doesn't present with a clear symptom of, you know, a cast on your broken arm, or radiotherapy for, you know, cancer, or whatever, heart surgery, whatever it is, naturally it's something that people fear. So if you can't understand it, and mental health is still something that's a relatively young, unstudied kind of field of medicine, yeah, that's where people just get scared. Like, people are very scared of it. So that's where the stigma kind of generally kicks in as well.
Yeah, and I think, like, I almost, like, even when I'm like posting stuff, like, I almost sometimes try and like shy away from like using certain words, or like, you know, like, oh, do I want to put, you know, like mental health in like a title of a podcast or something, you know, because like these things almost do like put people off, or, you know, because there's so many people that just sort of think, oh, like, I don't want to listen to that.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
like,
sure,
obviously
man.
that's fair enough, but
yeah,
you know, and like sometimes I think, like, okay, well, if I call, like, you know, if I like refer to it as like mindfulness, or like, you know, if you just kind of like change the narrative, or like change the words that you use, like you can almost like get people to understand what you're trying to say a little bit easier.
I think you can be quite tactful about the language that you use. I've, you know, had conversations with, I had a conversation with a friend of mine sort of a few weeks ago around terms like mindfulness, spirituality, you know, inner work, sort of inner child trauma, all of these topics that I think one of the things that within the space that I'm trying to operate is I'm trying to bridge the gap between terms like that, which have a very, very, I think, feminine, kind of hippie, you know, certainly not alpha male, certainly not, just masculine traits or connotations. So it's bridging the gap between actually helping men understand that concepts like that actually are just all about getting to know yourself, learning how to navigate a pretty fucking stressful world, and just kind of be quite peaceful inside, and switch off from all the exterior stresses and things that you don't really realizing are impacting you, and reconnect with your emotions. And as men, generally, we really struggle with that. You know, we're raised from very young to distance ourselves from any emotions that aren't macho, masculine, all that kind of shit. So I think it's definitely, you can be quite, you can certainly be quite, if you choose your words right, but there's still a big challenge, I think, regardless of the language that you use, for your kind of stereotypical men.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like you say, like whatever direction you go down, like you say, like, mindfulness, spirituality, then you go down another like identity or like branding of like, just like hippie, like create, you know, and it's just like whatever you like, everyone wants things to be put into like categories and boxes and labels, and when actually, like you say, just these things are all just, we're all kind of doing the same thing, but in like a very, just a slightly different way.
Yeah.
You know, even like religions, you can argue it's kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all generally like wanting the same thing, but just like a different story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just putting different labels on it.
Yeah. And so I guess, how did you, once you started like figuring out that it's something that we're like, we need to talk about, like as men or as like human beings or whatever, what was the kind of like a process that you had to go through in terms of who can I talk to this about, you know, because I think that you kind of quickly realize that there's like certain people in your friendship group, you know, you wouldn't approach the subject with, but then there's other people who you kind of go, okay, maybe if he's struggling or something, maybe we can have that connection.
Yeah, for sure. I was quite lucky. I think the first ever experience I had with talking to anyone about anything related to, at the time I didn't realize it was mental health, but the first time I ever spoke to a professional about it in any capacity, so, you know, sort of like an integrated therapist, like a counselor, was when I was about 16 or 17. And I ended up going to my GP because I was just like an angry teenager, and was really struggling to control a lot of emotion. And I think that was something that helped me quite a lot, because at a relatively young age, where I certainly, as I said, I felt quite out of control with my emotions and was really struggling to sort of just regulate them, I guess. I went to the doctor and ended up speaking to a counsellor, and that period of time was really interesting, because I remember at the time thinking that I was going to speak to this lady, this counsellor, and the main reason I was going to be talking to her in my mind was because I think, you know, I was in a relationship at the time. It was, you know, sort of young first love situation, and there was a lot of stress and pressure, and I had exams going on in school and whatnot. And during the sessions, as the kind of conversation progressed, and it was uncomfortable in the beginning, but as the sessions kind of progressed, the conversation took a natural steer towards kind of parents and, you know, my kind of childhood and things that had happened a lot younger. And that just, we seemed to find that the conversation sat far more around there. And what ended up kind of coming out of it was that actually it wasn't to do with my relationship. It was actually to do with the fact that my mum and dad were going through a separation. The family dynamic was falling apart. I'd had a fairly kind of, you know, not fairy tale, but a pretty solid family unit, you know, a real kind of traditional, really lovely, wonderful upbringing of, you know, a family of 5, and mum and dad were married and we were all in the same house. And then suddenly at 16, 17, things were kind of falling apart. And actually I was going through a process of grieving for that. So that was my first experience of talking to anyone about my own mental health. I didn't realize it was my mental health at the time. I just, like I said, just felt like I needed to talk to someone.
And is that something you kind of carried on, the seeing a therapist?
No, not for a long time. So I would say it was then, so 16, 17, so 2006, 2007 was that. But I didn't really have any, what I would describe as, like episodes or kind of massive triggers towards mental health until I was 24 and I was living in Australia. And that was for me when, I say this was just over 5 years ago, that was for me was when, you know, my life became quite heavily centered around mental health and my struggles. So at that point, in that scenario, I was living out in Australia. Again, it was this was a relationship-based issue. And I'd been in a relationship for 6 or 7 months. And my partner at the time, she had, just before we'd met, she'd planned to actually leave to go traveling to the other side of the world. So she was Australian, and she planned to come and travel throughout the other side of the world. And it's really bizarre looking back on it. I've done some work and I kind of understand what the trigger was and why it's there. But what happened was she left. You know, it was always the plan, but for some reason, when she left, that trigger just brought up some really, really quite powerful abandonment issues with me, and my whole fucking life fell apart. Like, being very honest, my everything, you know, my entire kind of idea of self and who I was, I suddenly found it very difficult to work. I felt like I couldn't turn up and go to work. I couldn't enjoy anything. I became severely chronically depressed. And it was a really quite scary thing to happen, as someone who'd, you know, gone through adulthood, you know, careers, traveling the other side of the world quite competently. You know, I dealt with that fairly in my stride. I hadn't had any issues or fears about traveling, or, you know, as I say, career wise, I've been really successful. So suddenly to experience that degree of, like disruption to kind of just your status quo mentally was pretty fucking frightening. so yeah, that actually brought me. I did see. I remember at the time when things suddenly got too much. I called a helpline. I think it was called Beyond Blue, which is an Australian mental health helpline.
Yeah.
And they kind of signposted me, especially being in another country. I wasn't sure of the process for seeking out help for mental health, being someone who was out there on a visa. So, but I was able to get some help, some kind of subsidized help through the Medicare system that they had out there. And I spoke to a therapist, again, really comfortable going to that, having had experience. But yeah, when I got back to the UK, I actually ended up having to come back to the UK because things like stress of finding a new job and all that kind of stuff. I had to come home because I was ill.
Yeah.
And it was easier to be at home, with family, with that support, because I was on the other side of the world with my family over here. Also, the girl that I loved was over here. And so, yeah, it brought me back.
I think the stigmatization about therapy is almost a whole another subject in itself.
Yeah, for sure.
I've had like 2 or 3 sessions like this year. And that was like the first time I'd kind of even considered it. And
okay.
Now, like this year's been pretty kind of good year. Like I was in Australia myself, and like I felt like I was at like a point where my mental health was actually pretty good. So I was kind of like, it made sense to me for me to like go, okay, well, let's check out this therapy. Like I'd be doing podcasts.
Okay.
Speaking to people, and they were talking about therapy, and I was just like, what am I so
you
scared
actually you reached out and decided to look into the process while in a fairly good state of mind, in a fairly strong kind of,
yeah, and like
rather than like a need.
Yeah, so like trying to be proactive rather than like reactive, because a year ago, I was like not in a good place, like with my mental health, and like I wish I'd have known to go and to go to a therapist, and it was actually quite a normal thing to do.
Absolutely.
I wish at that time that I could have done it.
That's it, man. I think it's too often than not, it generally, because there is a fear and a there is vulnerability involved in going and unloading and just sharing whatever scary shit is going on inside your head that you can't make sense of. But generally, that's what the process of therapy or counselling is, depending on the type of therapy that you have. It is, I've always described kind of therapy when people kind of are scared of maybe seeking out a therapist, or they're just scared to even discuss the topic of it whatsoever. I always try and relate it to the way that for me makes it feel more comfortable for people, is saying that, if you and I were sat here right now, and if I presented you with let's say a quantum physics equation, and you were told that you needed to solve that, you're going to sit there and go, oh, I haven't got a fucking chance in hell. I'm not, there's no way.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough. Like, that's because you aren't equipped with the tools or the knowledge to know how to do that. So in that scenario, if you had a gun to your head and were told you need to solve it, like, don't do what you like, but you have to solve it. What are you going to do? You're going to look up, you're probably going to call it the best university in England, speak to their head quantum physicist professor and say, hi there, I'm fucked, I need help with this. So if we can, and I appreciate it's far easier said than done to remove, the fear around, because we're talking about emotion, we're talking about vulnerability. There's obviously a fear factor in that. But if we can remove the kind of stigma of therapy and poor mental health, and say, right, I've got some shit going on in, emotionally or mentally that I can't make sense of. I need to solve. There's a problem you need to solve. What do? Go speak to someone. Go speak to someone who is equipped to help you understand and make sense of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And again, on the kind of being proactive and reactive, it's just like, we're talking about like mindfulness, and like meditation was something that I started as a reactive measure.
Meditation's sick, man.
Whereas now it's like, it's proactive, like I'll do it every day. And there's like,
do you?
Yeah. No, I love it. Really enjoy it. Is that something you've ever got into
Yeah, man. Yeah, meditation I got into about 3 years ago. A good friend of mine who I was living with at the time sort of floated the idea to me. He put me in sort of pointed me in the direction of, you know, things like guided meditation. So I think once again, we talk about meditation. If you've never done it, if you're not familiar with what it is, generally the connotations are hippie, flower power, airy fairy, like it's all that kind of shit. Meditation and the guided meditations as well are, you know, you don't have to sit around just going you know, and all that kind of stuff. Like there is a bit of that, and that stuff, there is this theory and why that works or how that helps you. But you know, apps like Headspace or Calm or Waking Up, you know, you're sitting and just listening to someone talk to you for 10 minutes and guide you through some exercises that essentially help you from just switch your brain off if you've got quite a frantic brain and you struggle to stop overthinking, and just center you, you know. So yeah, I got involved in guided meditations. So what was that? About 3 years ago. And don't worry, I've dipped in and out of consistently doing it, but it's always been a practice that I advocate will do. Generally, I can be a little bit, if I'm honest, reactive with it. So I'll pick it up when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and a bit shit. But I, like, for example, in January this year, I met every single day, 10 minutes before I went to bed. And I mean, fuck me, I felt wicked at the end of that month. Like I did. It's not just this equals this, but it helped massively towards me clearing my mind and, you know, sifting through other shit areas of my life that I was able to get my ducks in order in a row. And that was probably the catalyst.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those things that it's like, I mean, obviously, yes, there's a huge stigmatization about it, but there's not, like, when someone says like, oh, what's the benefits of meditation? Like, it's quite, you can explain it, but sometimes it's quite difficult to like explain, you know, just like, you just sit there for a bit and then, you know, you'll just feel better for it. Like, honestly, mate.
Like the way that someone described it to me and it has stuck with me is that generally, like, day to day, our thoughts we have however many thousands of thoughts throughout you know, a period of consciousness, i.e. a day of being awake. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, we've got tens of thousands of thoughts. And if you know, spend some time thinking about, that's a lot to process. So if you imagine your thoughts, I remember someone gave me the analogy of, if you imagine your thoughts like a motorway, imagine being on like one of those bridges that goes over a motorway, and you're just watching the traffic just go forward and back, whether it's rush hour or just the traffic's just relentless. You know, what meditation is doing is meditation allows you to actually imagine like witnessing or watching that same motorway, but instead of it being rush hour, actually you're able to witness it at the dead of night, you know, in the middle of the night where there are no cars on there. And suddenly, like, if you envision that, like, generally if you're picturing that, you get a real sense of calm imagining what that road in the middle of the night would be like. And that's what meditation achieves.
No, I love that analogy. So obviously you briefly talked about losing your friend to suicide, and it was similar. I had a similar experience, you know, a few years ago, which was kind of briefly spoken about. So I guess because I think for me, before I'd experienced that, I had kind of like absolutely zero awareness of mental health in general. And I guess that was, for me, that was my kind of first point. You know, you sort of said you had, you know, you kind of at least started to recognize kind of things about mental health when you were sort of 16 or whatever. I think I was about 21 when my friend died. And I think that was like my first, again, similar sort of scenario in the fact that probably had it pretty good up to that point in my life. And then kind of suddenly you're like, what? Like, what's happening here? Like, so I guess what did it sort of change your sort of outlook on things, or was it like just something that, how did it sort of change you as a person, if at all?
It easily is one of the it's one of the events in my life that's had the biggest, most profound impact on me, not only through on the mental health side of things, since I started kind of sharing my own experiences with mental health, again, about 4 or 5 years ago, sort of publicly through things like social media, just in it being so open, I became, I think, just quite fortunately, and because it was quite a bizarre thing, it wasn't a very common thing for people, and men in particular, a man in particular, to be so open. One of the things that happened as a result of that, I shared a Facebook post back in 2015, just sort of like putting it all out there, what I'd been going through for the previous year. And after that, people generally naturally just ended up opening up to me. I became quite a safe space for people I know really well, people I don't know really well, people I've never spoken to, would just start sharing. So, that helped me recognize that I've always loved serving people and helping people. When Harry died in 2018, one of the things that kind of, I think, that shook me most about that was, having been someone who people generally, were coming to and being very open with. And, I'd always prided myself on being someone who was a very, very approachable, safe person to have those sorts of discussions with. I never blamed myself. I didn't do that whole thing, because understandably, mental health really is, when someone feels that much shame or embarrassment or inability to open up, then they're going to hide it, like it's like their life depended on it, and he did. So I never did that, but I did reflect on the fact that he and I used to spend a fair amount of one-on-one time together. We went to football matches together. We'd go for walks and a beer down the beach together, just me and him. And the most I ever got out of him was he would occasionally speak very highly of me, and he dropped a couple of comments, I wish I sort of maybe had the bravery that you do, but never sort of when I'm struggling. He just sort of made comments about, like, sort of just saying, like, well done, mate, that's really great. So when Harry died, it was a real kind of, it just pushed me massively in the direction of, okay, how did this happen? Again, that, I guess, through a lot of pain, but also that analytical part of me that wants to understand these things, witnessed, I know his dad, and I witnessed his dad lose a son, which again is just when you see someone grieving and crying over the loss of their son at his funeral, it's that stuff that stays with you. And I started, I think my focus became less around my own mental health. I was still doing that stuff, but all of a sudden I started reflecting on, I think when you start finding out things like statistics from charities around suicide rates, and the fact that nearly 4 in 5 suicides are men, there are huge problems with the way that men perceive themselves, struggle to communicate, don't know how to ask for help, and there are reasons why those things are happening. So that's just where my kind of the impetus came for me to start reading into and reading up on those sorts of things. So yeah, that definitely, I think, shifted my focus big time.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with that, and I think we've kind of had similar experience. And I think not that it was interesting for me to kind of see how I reacted to the situation, and compared to sort of how, say, obviously my other friends did. And it's not to say that I wasn't affected by the situation, but I think, I think I was more affected by seeing other people being affected by it, like you said, the family, and obviously it sounds horrible to say, but kind of friends can come and go in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it's the family member and stuff, it's that's kind of on another level.
Yeah, sure.
And I think. Yeah, I think seeing that and having to sort of experience that, someone else losing someone like that really draws it home. Like, well, hang on, why is this happening? Because I think
it really does.
Up until that point, like I say, I was absolutely clueless about the whole subject, and you know, if someone said to me like, you know, talk to me about suicide, I'd kind of go like, I don't know, poor people, homeless people, you know, like I'm just trying to show how like naive I was.
No, absolutely. And one of the biggest changes that, one of the biggest, I'd say most important things that came out of it was, I remember, I actually remember that my dad and I had a very similar relationship to Harry and his dad. There were a couple of kind of correlations. We were all Tottenham fans, so me and my dad used to go to the football. Harry and his dad used to go to the football.
Yeah.
Played golf from time to time. Harry and his dad played golf all the time together. You know, me and Harry would invite our dads to the pub if the football was on, and you know, my dad and his dad, you know, were kind of like not mates with, but knew all of our friendship group, and they were sort of held in esteem with the boys.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking back to, I mean, it doesn't even have to go back sort of maybe 3, 4, 5 years, but I remember my dad being one of these kind of old, you know, of the generation with quite old-fashioned, uneducated, ignorant views on a number of different topics, suicide being one. And his views on suicide used to be, that's a really selfish thing to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, how could you do that? Would get quite animated and quite emotional. Wow, fucking selfish piece of shit. How can they do that to their wife? How can they do that to their kids?
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't believe the impact it had on my dad. It's actually impacted my dad in ways that are, I would say, actually quite, you know, it's had some long-term, quite harmful impact on him in terms of how he fears, you know, things like, for example, with me, he overtly worries about me and my mental health. Like it's had a massive impact on him, because all of a sudden he just goes, fuck, you know, like he got to view suicide through the lens of a father watching, you know, sort of losing his son. So, you know, his opinion on it has changed dramatically. It's gone entirely the other way. And, you know, he now sympathizes and just sees the pain and devastation and the sadness that someone must have had to be in to feel like the world would be a better place without them being in it.
Yeah. I think that's the frustrating thing, isn't it? That up until you have the experience of it, then you don't understand it, or you haven't had that education. And so I think that's kind of why, like that's certainly why I wanted to then sort of try and do, you know, the charity work and try and like raise awareness of the whole subject. Because you just like, obviously, you don't want to see anyone else go through the same shit that you've seen. It's and it's just really strange that like, and in like mental health and kind of is in the same umbrella in the fact that like, till you experience it, like you have no fucking clue. I mean, I have no idea what kids get taught like at school nowadays, but like, we have no idea, like no fucking clue about like mental health or suicide until it like, essentially until it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's something that, you know, that's something that I've sort of, within the kind of platform and the social media stuff, like I've literally been running my social media page for 3 months. So it's, you know, it's gone from, I mean, I've got like 1,700 odd followers. Like it's, you know, it's not like the biggest following in the world, but one of the avenues in terms of what I want to do and where I want to take it, one of them would be education.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to go and get into, you know, secondary school, speaking to kids from, I don't know, 13 upwards, and talking about the reality of navigating your kind of mid to late teen to early adolescent years in relation to things like, mental health, social media, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And you know, I think there is some stuff in education. I think that they do a lot of, my mum's in education. She's talked to me a lot about things like safeguarding, and they do have lots of people come in and like, I guess what, you know, like PSHE, the stuff that we used to do. And, you know, a lot of it is focused on that now, but I think, we've got to do a hell of a lot more around that sort of that education piece.
Yeah. And I think that was something that I, to be fair, you know, I sort of tried to pick it up when I was a student, and it's kind of fallen away. But that was something that I got involved with going into schools and speaking and stuff. And I mean, like there can't be enough people like doing that, I think. I think just going back to the what you said about like people do kind of see it as like a selfish thing, sort of suicide in general, which I think is natural. But I think just the sort of the counter to that, as what I always say, is that, you know, like, that imagine what they must have been going through in order to, well, be that selfish, if you want to look at it that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If they're gonna leave behind these loved ones, like, imagine how they were feeling. Not to say that it's the right thing to do, but they just obviously just didn't understand that there was another option.
No, exactly. Well, that's it. I mean, the people who hold an opinion like that, it's I know the word ignorant can very commonly be used as an insult. I don't mean to insult anyone who's ignorant. And it's not an insulting word. It is just a lack of knowledge or experience around a particular topic, to which they apply a logic that actually is biased, again, uneducated, and comes from a place of whether it be fear or it is something that's really common. Like I say, until you experience it, and suddenly you start reading about it, and you suddenly start looking at case studies of people who had everything in the world, Robin Williams, Chester Bennington, lead singer of Linkin Park, that's a band I grew up listening to and absolutely adore to this day. He had a wife. I think he has 5 children, millions of dollars, beautiful house. How can you sit there and say, how selfish is that? How can you, because he was loved and adored by millions around the world. He had a wonderful family unit. And when you start looking into that stuff, it's not always, but generally there's a very common link to things like, you don't know that someone's had extreme child trauma, whether it be abandonment trauma, sexual trauma in their childhood, all kinds of things like that. That's just to name a couple. But I'm a firm believer that things happen to people and it stays with them, and it manifests in potentially some really, really harmful ways, in later on in life. And when people feel ultimately, you've got people who weren't able to overcome their issues. And I've also recently heard people describe suicide in a way where actually we need to respect the choice that person made, because it's only their reality, and their reality is one that was so they couldn't suffer it any longer. We don't know what that was like. We all live in our own realities. Everyone's world is different to every other person's in the world. The way we perceive the world is different to everyone else. We're unique. And if someone's reality was that brutal, savage, couldn't handle experiencing it anymore, as heartbreaking as it is for us, actually, we need to respect that person's decision. Which is I think that's quite a controversial topic, but that's something that I quite firmly believe.
No, I definitely see the point. See that side of the things. I guess the danger with that is just sort of like people thinking that it's okay that it happens. I guess I presume that's why people.
I still hold the belief that there's always a way back. There is always a way back from that point and that decision of where you're potentially about to make a decision that is final. There's a wonderful saying that says, don't make a permanent decision in a temporary frame of mind. And I personally never made a plan to be suicidal, to put a plan in place to do anything like that. I remember about 4 years ago, I remember I was living at my dad's at the time, and I was about to go to work one morning, and I came downstairs and he went, "Are you all right?" And I went, "No," I said, I just don't want to be here anymore. And I truly meant it. I didn't start writing a plan out, but I was so exhausted. I was so exhausted and defeated by waking up every day and feeling like the world would be a better place without me in it. And like I say, that was pretty much 2 years solid, every single day, and I came back from it. So it's I think that's and I appreciate you making that point. I would never ever advocate it being an okay thing. I think that once the decision is made, though, once someone has gone and done it, don't get me wrong, take everything you can out of it, learn everything you can out of it, you have to learn from situations like that. Like it's super important too. I just think that if you're harboring any resent or anger towards that person, that's the stuff you need to let go of and kind of accept and respect the decision from that side of things.
Yeah. I think it's I guess again in a similar respect to like in my thoughts of kind of like putting mental health in a podcast title. Sometimes I kind of like shy away from that say just writing about suicide. And obviously there's a level with anything, like you don't want to just be like that preaching whatever. I think there's I found that there's like a level, like if I'm just going to my all my mates all the time, like about meditation, or whatever it might be, like you realize that you're becoming like some sort of like, like you're pushing religion.
It's like basically like you're trying to push a cult, isn't it? Like you're just saying like, like it's like the stereotype of veganism, isn't it? Like actually, like whether you're vegan or you're not, like the stereotype of vegan is like you're literally like ramming, cow milk is, all that kind of stuff, like just all those you don't want to deal with it. It switches people off. People need to come to you and ask you. Or so this is where I think I've actually developed a real appreciation for having a space where I put content out, or I share an idea around a topic, and it can be anything. It could be toxic masculinity, it could be suicide, it could be borderline personality disorder, it could be anything. And what that does is generally it provokes it's like a little spark for a conversation. If someone wants to learn more about that, or if you say something that has resonated with someone, or something that they didn't quite understand but they were interested to learn, they come to you. Force stuff on people, which I find quite difficult, because I have a lot of friends, like I've got a lot of male friends who are who for me tick a lot of the stereotypical boxes for a normal white straight man in a Western society, who exhibit quite common behaviors of maybe not understanding deep emotional kind of complicated topics, and they probably laugh them off or don't want to talk about them because they're threatening. So I struggle with managing that sometimes, because I might want to be like, nah mate, what the fuck are you talking about? Like that's not what's going on there. Like how can you be so fucking ignorant? But that's not my place. Like it's hard to know how to manage those sorts of situations.
And I was going to say, is it been easier since you've kind of like, say if you've got an Instagram page saying this, then like you almost don't need to have that conversation. I'm guessing, is that the kind of case? If you kind of put it out there, then it almost makes it easier.
I started the page specifically because I have an Instagram page already that has however many hundreds of followers, and all of those people had it was a personal page. It was originally a page from when I was a PT, so I had a few people that followed me from a fitness perspective. I then had just friends of friends, people who just follow you for whatever reason, and I felt really, really uncomfortable about changing the style of content and becoming a voice dedicated to that concept, just through fear of judgment, and through ultimately, again, I guess it was, and having just said what we said about pushing a sort of almost like a cult style narrative of I'm going to be talking about this and you're going to listen to me. I started a new page because actually anyone who decides to follow me is doing so voluntarily, and I then don't need to worry about the opinions of people who might not want to hear the shit I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did exactly the same thing with the Flipside podcast, because I was just like, I started putting it out on my personal page, and then I was just like, do you know what? Like, there's something like doesn't feel like I don't feel entirely comfortable about like just putting it out there in the normal setting. And there's maybe sort of a bit of insecurity in that, but it felt like there was a lot more protection than just like creating a separate like brand.
It's a safe space. It's absolutely a safe space for you to then, like I say, you share stuff that you care about, and but I think that's something that, again, we as men probably as well, like creativity, and so getting creative. So whether it be me creating videos or sort of just posts with quotes or photos of me and stuff like that, like I fear people looking at me like, oh, he's fucking arrogant, thinks a lot of himself, likes the sound of his own voice. Yeah, like just all that kind of stuff. Like I genuinely had worries and concerns about that, and it stifled me. And like I've actually been through a period over the last like 4 or 6 weeks where I felt very creatively stifled, and I felt that little voice of, you know, worrying about certain people's opinions about things creep back in. I've shaken that off in the last like day or two and just gone, right, fuck it, and suddenly the creative juices started flowing. I want to start talking about this and that. But yeah, like it's worrying about people's opinion is something that can really affect you. So having that safe space, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I think being able to not care what people think can be so fucking powerful.
Yeah.
Like, and you really do realize, like, I mean, I've been here for 3 months on my own, and like even just that makes me realize like that, you know, you can just be so much more creative if you just drop the whole, oh, I wonder what so-and-so think.
It's an interesting topic, one that I have got a lot of time for, because like I said, I recently started letting perceived opinions of people creep back into affecting my decision making. And, you know, my my passion for creating content. I suddenly felt fear, and I felt like I stopped writing my emails, I stopped writing my blog, stopped creating videos. And there was some stuff going on in my life as well that has been happening over the last couple of months that actually I think it's quite fair that would have had an impact on my time. And I've just gone back to work. I'm now working sort of 45, 50 hours a week again. So I don't have, you know, furlough and, you know, all the time under the sun anymore. I was living at my dad's, and I didn't really feel like I had the space to be creative and think and get, you know, just fuck around and have fun creating different types of content, because I was just worried about him hearing me from downstairs and all that kind of shit. Like, so that stuff happens. I think it can be very, like, when we say, oh, we just need to stop giving a fuck, like, way easier said than done, because you know, we have, generally it will be people whose opinions that we care about that we shouldn't, but there's a reason why we do, and it will be our relationship to that person. You know, generally it will be stuff like mates of mine that I've known for 10, 15 years that I went to school with, and it will be the version of myself that I think they think of me, that when I start behaving outside of that, I know it's going to either roll them up, or they're going to sit and laugh or judge and stuff like that. So it's a complicated thing to let go of. But again, something you can study, you can read up on, you know, subtle art of not giving a fuck, all that kind of stuff, you know, those great books and literature around it.
Yeah. And I think like there's definitely something in taking yourself out of your environment, even if it's just on like a temporary basis. You know, like, for example, obviously I was coming back from Australia for a year, and like it does take you out of that environment. It takes you out of the, like, say, the people that you might have lived with for like your whole life. And then
I think that's one of the reasons why people love going, traveling and spending time in Australia, because they go, and whether you do it at 20 or 20, I did it when I was 23. You know, I went out there with a few friends. I ended up living in Sydney on my own for most of it. You know, I connected with a new bunch of friends, and it allowed me to become a new version of myself, where I wasn't held back by perceived versions of myself through people who'd known me in years previous, you know? So yeah, man, like I totally buy into that. And I generally feel, when I feel stifled, or I feel like I'm overthinking or worrying about people's opinions, it's the people's opinions from like a long time ago. It's not people who I've just met, because if they just met me, I'm me. But it happens more than I'd like to admit, and I think it's something I'm still definitely working on. Yeah, no, like you say, it's like, it's one of those things that's just easy said than done. It's like, it's not a battle you'll ever win. Like, there's no end to it. It'll always be there to a degree. I think you can, through things like meditation and mindfulness, though, you can actually learn to recognize when you get triggered by something, or that little thought, that little voice comes up. You can learn to observe that and maybe either ignore it or manage it. Like, but it takes practice. It takes an awful lot of practice, and just you have to do it over and over again. Yeah, 100%. The last podcast I did was on kind of like
a lot on like masculinity and femininity,
Okay.
and like it was such a like complex conversation even just to have. But I guess like like there's I can see kind of like from what you put out on Instagram, like you obviously sort of like one of the lads, like to have fun, like to have a laugh, and then there's the sort of like you want to talk about mental health, which is something that's kind of a bit like, well, sort of serious, or like spirituality, and like how have you found that, like that sort of balance? Because I think for me it's something that like I've only just sort of brought into my life, that like that side of things, like over the past kind of couple of years.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like you're kind of not playing two people or being fake or anything, but like sometimes there's a sort of like it's a strange contrast.
Yeah, there is. You get caught. I would say that one of the biggest challenges I have had, and probably have found myself having again, probably I'm in the middle of having it at the moment, is that challenge of discussing topics and concepts around masculinity, where friends of mine exhibit traits of masculinity that I think that I don't agree with. And having whilst I have spent a lot of time learning to understand the mechanics of how someone comes to be that way, and how society raises men to form opinions around mental health, homosexuality, whatever, all of these kind of issues. I think that they're often branded under things like toxic masculinity. Learning how to manage that when you see someone that you socialize with, care about, they're your friend, that can be a real challenge. And yeah, I think that it is definitely difficult. But I think what I have found, we sort of discussed it a minute ago, where we said like, I can feel myself when I'm being authentic, I stop worrying about the opinions of those sorts of people. I've got to really let I've got to let my friendship group and people that lads that I hang around with, I've got to let them make the decision whether they buy into me and my content, or actually whether they're going to kind of reject it.
Yeah.
And I've started experiencing recently, if I'm honest, I think I've started to experience a bit of rejection. So I think through the path that I've sort of started going down, where I've started, discussing things like why men, and we're talking like, again, the stereotypical straight white male, might exhibit, or say things around like why do straight men have such issues with, exhibit homophobic kind of tendencies so often. Why does a straight man say things homophobic, but I just don't want to see it? I don't want to see two men kissing. Why not, is my question. And it's because it threatens their idea and what they are conditioned and raised to believe a man should be and should do. My understanding of the mechanics of that scenario is that actually, if you are truly comfortable, I'm comfortable with my sexuality, they always say. My understanding of that is, if you are comfortable within your sexuality, you could witness two gay guys kissing on the street and go, fucking hell, that's like, they look like they're in love, or like even have a bit of banter. Go on, lads, like, have a bit of fun, whatever. Yeah. Or, if you were to get like real deep into it, and this might sound like not to be too crude, but imagine as a straight guy, someone sat there and forced you to watch gay porn. Okay, you might not enjoy that sexually. They might, and that's the fear. But if you are truly comfortable with it, you could watch that in the same manner that you would watch a show on TV, like a nature show, and monkeys are doing it, or like different types of animals are doing it. So that's what it is. It's about the threat that it poses to them, and then the physiological emotional response is one that's really severe. So so it's all that kind of stuff. And when I see men exhibit those behaviors, I haven't got a lot of time for that. And I'm starting to, once again, I talked about it in a post I put up recently. about why I've started becoming quite vocal around transgender rights, around Black Lives Matter movement, you know, kind of content that I'm sharing and trying to educate myself on and open the discussion. When you're not gay, you're not transgender, you're not Black, why aren't you staying in your lane, so to speak? And I'm like, just because I'm an empathetic person and I want to understand issues of people that don't affect me. And actually that ties into the whole men's struggle with, you know, we live in a male dominated world where it's always been the world according to men, the patriarchy. And as a result, we're all arrogant fuckers, and we think we know better than, you know, we think we're better than women. We think we're better than, you know, if we're white, we're better than Black. Like, and not consciously, but subconsciously. Yeah. And systemically, we are subconsciously raised with these biases. So yeah, man, it's a challenge to navigate that when you feel as though, and yeah, you get accused of just being like, oh, he thinks he's fucking woke, like he's, you know, all this bullshit. And it's like, nah, I'm just a conscious, kind, empathetic person, and I believe in treating people fairly. So yeah, it's hard work.
And I think the people that like you say, it's a good example with the like straight guys being uncomfortable with gay guys. Like it's so interesting to think, like, to actually think like, yeah, why are you actually uncomfortable with that?
Yep. Big time. Yeah. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, by the way, but that's just like, that's like my whole thing is yeah, it's challenging those situations or those belief systems that so many men have, because I feel like I've started to connect where it comes from, and it is to do with how we are raised. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's really important to say as well. It's not, men aren't just born pieces of shit who, you know, are a homophobic, fucking, you know, racist bunch of, we're not. But yeah, it's where and how we start reconnecting ourselves to these ideas of being empathetic and listening to other people that we maybe aren't parts of their demographic.
Yeah, because I think it's hugely important to be like I said, empathetic towards other people's, say, lack of education or lack of awareness. Also, like your own like lack of education or lack of awareness. Like you could, like, you know, I think it's easy enough to sort of pick out everyone else in your environment that can't have that awareness, that is uncomfortable with homosexuality or whatever, but then not being able to, I think one of the things that's even more important is being able to like look inside yourself and go like, well, hang on, like I wasn't comfortable with, say, if it's homosexuality, like, no, if you can notice that you're not comfortable with it, like at least accept that you weren't uncomfortable with it and go like, well, hang on, like, why wasn't I uncomfortable with that? Because you might actually believe that there's nothing wrong with it. Like,
look, the thing is that you're spot on, because, you know, when I would have said that exact thing. You know, I'm not gay, I just don't want to see it. When I was like, I don't know, 18 or 19 or whatever, like maybe when I was 20, 21. And like, yeah, why did I feel that way? Because I didn't understand homosexuality. It threatened my idea of what men were. And I said the most kind of acceptable thing that you can say, which is, I'm not homophobic, but I just, I don't want to see it or whatever, or blah, blah, blah. You know, this is, I guess, and we won't go into, I don't know, the whole Black Lives Matter stuff is obviously an entirely another, big topic, but for me, it's the same kind of process where, you know, like people will say, I'm not racist, but like fucking this Black Lives Matter movement stuff is just, it's all people just rioting and stuff like that. It's like, all right, well, yeah, if it's someone on Instagram, you're white, you're straight, and you've got a British flag in your, you know, in your little icon, like your little profile photo. Yeah. So yeah, it's just ignorance, and it's when we exhibit, or when things bring up discomfort within us, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, a discomfort response, that's where something's trying to teach us something. It's always the case. So mental health, when you are going through a period of mental health, your body, your mind is trying to tell you something that you are living out of. You need to change something is causing that. So yeah,
and I think just quickly on that sort of subject of looking at other people and being almost like scared of something different, if it's black, white, homosexuality, whatever. Like, I always think that, you know, it's natural to be scared of like things that are different, or like your body's like designed to like go like, oh, danger, like change. You know what I mean? It's going to be scared of like these things.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's right. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's good to be aware of that, because then you can like I say, have that empathy with yourself.
Yeah. Have you done much?
Then
yeah. Have you done much reading up on the concept of the ego?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So that's what the ego is. Having listened to books like Ego is the Enemy, done a bit of studying of it in psychology when I was in school, like that's what the ego is. The ego is the thing that is designed to protect us. So when we see, hear, experience something that we perceive could threaten our idea of either who we are or how we live our lives, the ego is designed to make whatever that is, it kind of makes it about us, you know, and it goes, and we suddenly start, again, giving our opinions on things or criticizing and tearing down things through a lens where it's one of, whether it be ignorance or privilege or just lack of empathy, because we've not been through what that person's gone through. So actually, our ego is making their problem about us, when actually we just need to shut the fuck up and listen, and we'll learn. And suddenly, what happens when you learn? Like, again, you're broadening your kind of your emotional spectrum. You're learning from people who have got different experiences to you. Yeah,
man. And it's so powerful being able to be the observer of your ego rather than it controlling you as well. That's
spend my fucking life like with it driving a massive number of parts of my life. I've made some crazy decisions based on ego throughout my life. So exactly, man. We learn it through we learn it in retrospect. You know, hindsight's 20/20 and all that. So
on I guess like putting yourself out there. You know, I guess like labeling yourself as like, hey guys, like this is my Instagram page, this is my blog, whatever it might be. Like, I'm talking about mental health. Like, do you ever find there's a sort of like almost like I don't want to use the word burden, but do you find that like quite, well, yeah, I'll use the word burden, but like, do you find sometimes that it, obviously you then have to kind of be really aware that there's going to be people that are going to come to you and talk to you about, you know, possibly quite like difficult stuff and have difficult conversations?
Yeah, that's a crack question, by the way, because yes, like that does happen. I think within, you know, when you're someone who, you know, understands the benefits of creating a space for someone to talk, you know, and share their kind of emotions and feelings. When I started the Instagram page, I would get, I mean, whether it was off the back of a particular piece of content that I've shared or just something I've discussed on my story, I get people that I've never met before suddenly just absolutely unloading, and I mean really, really intimate details around there, whether it be their romantic partners or, you know, their childhood traumas, which, no matter how you look at it, that to sit there and read that, it's very difficult to then, of course, someone shares something with you that's deeply personal and troubling. I've got an obligation to respond to that.
Yeah.
You know, not just because someone can see it's been seen on Instagram DMs, but because someone's just shared something with you. They're going through some shit and they felt comfortable enough to share that with you. So yeah, absolutely. And you know, when you've got that happening on a regular basis, it can be, whether you know, I mean, I'm not a qualified therapist or counselor or anything, you know, I'm not by any way, shape or form anything like that. But you know, you do hear that, you know, therapists have therapy, therapists have therapists.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, because they're sat listening to people's fucking difficult, traumatizing stories about all kinds of horrible things that have happened or the shit that they're currently going through. And you've got to be able to process that and hopefully give that person something in return. It doesn't have to be advice. It could just be the space for them to share. But if you are an empath and someone who feels other people's emotions, it's going to take its toll. So there's definitely a burden there. And I think I have at times in the past felt that kind of, I don't know, get me down a little bit. Like, but again, it just comes back to you doing. But yeah, it comes back to you just making sure that you do still prioritize you and you do the shit that you need to do for yourself.
Yeah, because I think that's something that I found when I started getting involved with the charity work. Although it was like hugely rewarding, and I loved the fact that the cause that I was, trying to contribute towards. I soon realized that like whoa, like there's, not I'm not qualified for this, but well, yeah, partly that in some scenarios that you might get yourself into. And I think I soon realized that like if ever I was at an event with a t-shirt that said whatever on, like I needed to be prepared to have those conversations. And because it's so true. There's so many people that will come up to you, and possibly just because they don't know you, and there's the anonymity aspect of it that people do want to talk.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I found with it is that it's important to remember that you're not a therapist and that you shouldn't be giving advice, and it's really about signposting, and it's about helping people see what their next steps are. That's where I generally try to do my best is if someone shares something with me, whilst I might have an opinion on what they're going through and what I think is best for them, I need to I always do my best not to give that, because I just do my best to thank them for sharing, encourage them that it's really important that they've done so, and to speak to someone who is qualified to support them through whatever they're going through.
Yeah, and I guess I would caveat that by saying, like, if you are listening to this and you do want to reach out, I'm not saying don't, but like, because obviously, I'm sure you get people reaching out, and even if it's just something that I don't put too much out there about mental health necessarily, but like, I still get people saying, oh, I related to this on the podcast or something. And so, I'll caveat that by saying, please do if you relate to something. But I just wanted to ask that question to you.
No, I'll dream, because I'm worried that I've said something again. But you're absolutely right. It was going to say, no, do you know what? Actually, it's a bit heavy. Can you just give me a break? Never. Like my DMs are open to anyone and everyone, on the basis of that's why I do it. That's exactly why I put stuff out there. I would never put myself and my experiences and my content out there to start a conversation and then never be willing to continue it. Because that's exactly what it is. If you relate to something, or you see something that touches your experience or triggers something within you, and you want to have a conversation about it, always get in touch. Like my DMs or my emails are open at any time. I mean, I've ended up spending time on the phone with people of occasion. People who I've connected and become actually like good friends with, and they share their experiences with me. Never feel afraid to reach out.
Yeah, and I think there's another side to that coin, in that I've always felt that any kind of, like, even if you're in some sort of job, if you're managing people at whatever level, like I used to manage restaurants, and I always used to say that, like, obviously this is because, all right, fair enough, I've had certain levels of training through suicide charities and things, but I would always say, like, I think it's a people manager's responsibility to at least be an approachable person that someone can come and speak to, not necessarily in a professional way, and a mental health professional way,
but that's what makes good leaders in any business. I was a manager for a number of years in telecoms industries, sales industries, and I think that's what makes a good, whether it be coach, manager, leader, is that you are approachable and that you're there for your people. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that for the people on YouTube, just how red I've gone. Like, it's absolutely boiling in this place. I think
it's pretty warm. I opened my window about 20 minutes ago because I was just sat here like
error. I think I always blame it on it's like a ginger thing. So
like that complexion.
With the blog, the Instagram, like, do you find it quite like therapeutic just to talk about these things? And I mean, reading your blog, it seems like it's very much kind of your journal, right, in a way.
Yeah, very much so. It's very cathartic. It is more often than not, I'll sit down, and when I want to write, whether it's one of my weekly emails, or if it's a blog article, particularly I would say with the weekly emails. There have been times where I have not vented, but I've shared an experience, and it's actually helped the process of typing it out and writing it all down. What's happened to me that week that I'm sharing, and there'll be a lesson in there. It'll be me just calling someone a fucking prick or something. There'll be something that's happened, and I'm referring to that and why there's something to why there's a lesson to take out of this scenario. But as I'm writing it down, it serves the same purpose as talking. Why we always promote and encourage the concept and the reason why we should always talk about our feelings or our experiences. And as it goes down into an email and I've seen it typed out, actually I sit there, and if I feel confident that I've articulated it well, I read it back and I go, yeah, I'm fucking happy with that. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And so it definitely is. It definitely serves a purpose for me by being able to share. And I've shared some pretty personal stuff over the last couple of months, and that's, like I say, it helps me, and it also helps me in the way of, I feel like I'm hopefully giving something to someone where they can learn from what my experience was.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I've only started journaling kind of like this year, but like it's so powerful. And sometimes I like voice journal, so like if I'm like, don't really do it at the minute just because I'm stuck somewhere, but like when I was like in Australia, like out on my way to work, I'd just like talk myself through something, and like it might be like just something trivial, but like even if it like you kind of at first you feel a bit stupid that there's no one on the bloody no one on the other end of it, but like then
I've done it, man.
Yeah, it's similar to sort of like being the observer of the ego, and it's just like if you talk something out, you're like, oh fuck yeah, like if I just do like that.
Absolutely, man.
So yeah, maybe I should just start voice journaling straight onto Instagram and just see what happens.
Get it done, man. Just do it. I'm starting to. I'm putting together a bit of a concept at the moment, which, I mean, I haven't even started creating content around it. But a guy that I follow who operates in a very similar space, he does a guy called Ben. He goes by the Naked Professor, and he's just a wonderful guy who, again, I'm very, very big fan of his vulnerability and how he shares his experiences through social media. And he does something every week where he does like an Instagram live, and he basically creates that live is just a space for anyone who joins, if they want to jump on and share whatever the fuck they're going through in their experience. I want to do something similar, like that. I'd like to make it not exclusively for men, but specifically with a place to encourage men to kind of just jump on, open up, even just type something if they want to just type something and share it there. I'd like that. For me would be like a weekly thing where I can check in and I can share how I'm feeling, and I can allow other people to do the same. Hopefully if I demonstrate that vulnerability, I guess that it will hopefully encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? Just like trying to share the fact that it's good to share or be vulnerable. And then like it's one of those where like the more you kind of put yourself out there in that respect, the more you realize that just every fucker out there is going through exactly the same thing. Not exactly the same thing, but a very similar thing. And
that's what happens all the time, is that when you share the shit that you thought was only you are going through it, you think that no one else will understand, no one else, everyone will judge you, everyone will think that whatever weird, deep, dark, bizarre shit is going on in your head or your heart, as like it could be like you could literally sit there and think like, this is the most fucked up thing that is going on in my head. I'm thinking it's like I'm crazy. Swear to God, you put that shit out there, people will literally say, oh my God, I felt that exact thing. All of a sudden you'll sit and you'll go, oh my God, I'm not fucked and mental. Like what I'm experiencing, whilst I don't think it's normal, other people are doing it, like are having that too. It happens pretty much every time like I've ever done it, or I've seen other people do it. People gravitate to it and they say, oh yeah, I've had that too. Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty about kind of social media, podcasts, whatever it might be, is the fact that like that kind of creates like a space where you can like almost like just be like a fly on the wall. So like we're just having a conversation as we would, but like everyone listening can be like a fly on the wall and just be like, someone will relate to something that we say. I mean, I hope someone cares.
Or they're just going to sit and listen to me and you chat for God knows how long and go, well, they're fucking idiots.
We're still winning.
What they're talking about. Nah, of course, yeah, that's never going to happen.
No, but I think with all these things, like I always say that it's like even to the level of suicidal thoughts, it's about normalizing it. Yeah. So like when you can look at statistics about suicidal thoughts, and realize that how many people actually have those thoughts, and then again, I think there's kind of like people kind of go, whoa, like it's not normal, and it's not that it's not horrible, and like like you obviously opened up and said that you had suicidal thoughts for sort of 2 years, which like God, like I can't imagine how awful that must have been for you, but it's also quite comforting for people to realize that there are other people out there having exactly the same thoughts.
Yeah, the thing with it is that people think that it's not normal. It's not that it's not normal. It is normal. What's actually happening in that kind of cognitive thought process where they're analyzing what's going on is they can't understand it. So they can't understand why they're feeling what they're feeling. So that's why they think it's not normal, because we all actually think that we have all of the answers and we understand all of our own thoughts, all of our own behaviors. It's generally, that's what mental health is. It's the thoughts and feelings and behaviors that we don't understand what they are or why they're occurring. So because we can't explain them, that's why we're embarrassed about them, because we can't explain why we're feeling. And again, it comes back to the people who have all the material, external, boxes of their lives completely checked off. They're happily married, wonderful, beautiful kids, great job, go on lovely holidays, wear nice clothes, eat at nice restaurants, but they are fucking miserable. Like, if you can't explain it, you feel embarrassed. And therefore, because you can't understand it, that's where you're like, there's something not right, there's something not normal. But it happens so much, so it's so common.
Yeah, and I think it is really difficult to, even if you know that there's something out there called depression, something out there called anxiety, all these different kind of like labels and obviously very real things. But then being able to then just like think, well, hang on, what's happening for me though? And I think there's almost that people could go on for, I had a lad on the podcast who said that he was essentially, just sort of like silent for like 7 years, having like depression, and you just think like,
wow,
like, I mean, it's sort of like painful to even hear that, like, and I think it's just sort of actually realizing that like, oh no, okay, like that is what I'm feeling, like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. It comes, and again, just bring it back to what I said earlier, is that if you can't explain or understand or figure something out, you go and speak to the expert. It's as simple as that. Once again, very easy to say, remove the shame, remove the embarrassment, remove the fear, and just go and do it, because those things are difficult to overcome. But when you do, you've taken that first step. And then once you've been on that journey and you've come out the other side, whether it be weeks, months, years later, you'll sit back and go, thank fuck I didn't listen to that fear any longer.
Yeah, totally. No, look, man, I love the stuff that you're putting out there. Love what you're doing. I think it's awesome. So carry on doing it, man.
Thank you.
Have you got anything coming up? Where can people find you?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I generally put most of my stuff out on Instagram, so it's just at The Honest Bloke.
Not The Honest Guy.
It's not The Honest Guy. Yeah, so The Honest Bloke. I've got my my website as well, where I've got my website as well. It's just thehonestbloke.co. It's in the link in my bio on Instagram. It's got my blog on there, on Facebook as well, but I generally just reshare stuff onto there at the moment. But yeah, man, I'm hoping to get back involved with kind of hosting Instagram lives. I've got a podcast in the works, but I want to get it right. So there's hopefully a lot of good content coming up. But yeah, just come and get involved and join the conversation. If it's something that, whether you're a bloke and you're struggling with your mental health, or whether you're a bloke who's got a friend who's going through it, if you're a woman and you've got a partner or a friend who's struggling with opening up, hopefully there's something there for you that will, again, start a conversation or start to break down that fear.
Yeah, man. Nice. I couldn't agree more. And I'm looking forward to that podcast as well.
Good stuff, man. I'm sure we'll get you on in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Right, man.